Hello, my friend. My name is Bita Pobalozwi. Feel free to call me Bui. I am here to share health-based information and health-based research that I have access to with you. And I hope you are having a lovely day where you are. And most importantly, I hope you're having a healthier day wherever you are. In this clip, I will be discussing some of the stigma-sensitive terms that you can use in your day-to-day life and to reduce the instances where we unintentionally stigmatize others through the communication or the words that we use, right? So instead of saying mother-to-child transmission, we should be referring to this as perinatal transmission. And instead of saying at risk or high risk person or population, which I'm guilty of saying, is person or population with greater likelihood of, or somebody who have, or populations that have a high incidence of, or better yet, affected communities, right? It's interesting because these are terms that I have also used in advocacy. And one thing I do know is that the terminology always changes. And this is why we need these kind of guides from these experts to actually tell us what are the stigma sensitive terms that we can use so that we can reduce, because typically I think sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes you don't know any better, and this is why we have these guides to help us direct us to use the less stigmatizing versions of these terms. And also they talk about HIV specific terminology, stigmatizing terms that we should be avoiding. Don't say AIDS when you are referring to the virus HIV, right? And they also highlight here related terms to avoid. Don't say died of AIDS, right? So these are the alternatives to saying those. Say HIV or HIV and AIDS when you're referring to both. And you also say died from complications related to HIV or died of an AIDS-related illness, right? And this is their explanation for this. AIDS itself is not a condition. It is a range of conditions or a syndrome that occurs when a person's immune system is weakened by HIV. There is stigma associated with AIDS, so HIV is preferred and most often more accurate. The other terms listed avoid the incorrect assumption that AIDS is uniformly fatal and clarify that opportunistic infections are the acute cause of AIDS. Right, and other stigmatizing terms to avoid. Don't say HIV infection or HIV infected. Some things that I'm also guilty of saying. I am learning, and we thank goodness for the updated guides. So some of the related terms to avoid in this context are HIV infected people, HIV positives, HIV carriers, people infected with HIV, HIV uninfected people. No, no, no. Those are the things we don't say, okay? The alternatives or the stigma sensitive alternative to saying that is HIV. People or person living with HIV, people or person with HIV, HIV status, HIV diagnosis, HIV acquisition, HIV transmission, right? And why? Here's the why. Infection, in quotes, carries the stigma of being contagious, a threat, or unclean, right? HIV advocates frequently highlight the damaging consequences of this word choice. In specific situations, the term HIV infection is necessary to describe the biological process. In most cases, however, HIV alone accomplishes the necessary communication. Person first language. Person first language, not disease first language, right? Person first language emphasizes humanity. Living with is an affirmation of life many advocates prefer. Pause or POZ is also sometimes used by community members themselves. And when they say pause, I remember the Pause magazine. Yeah, I love it. I think I'm following them on Facebook. Yeah, I love it. And still in this conversation about using more stigma sensitive terms or the alternatives to stigmatizing terms, we don't say HIV cases. That's not what we say. What we say is people or person living with HIV, people or person with HIV, people or person newly diagnosed with HIV, or people or person who recently acquired HIV. People should not be described as a case, as this term de-emphasizes humanity and implies burden. So person first language should be used when referring to people who are newly diagnosed with HIV or when referring to general incidents. However, it is acceptable to refer to the data using terms such as cases, diagnosis, and the term incidence itself, which is the most objective term.